Hi folks, Sunnyary here. Today I'm doing a quick run through of a 26 Galikrond's fall that I did in the Fortified Bolstering week. Now, Bolstering is a horrific affix for a tank to deal with. Add it to Fortified and this is probably one of the worst affix combinations you can get, so this is pretty rough. By the time this video goes up, it will have been about a week or so since I did this. It was about halfway through that week. In terms of how my character is looking, stats are pretty much the same as the Wainecrest key that I uploaded a little while ago, which you should see a link somewhere for. If you are interested, basically I'm giga stacking haste because more haste equals more holy power, equals more shield of the righteous, equals more word of glory. It's just generally good defensive value. And offensive, of course. Versatility is my secondary because it's not tying me to consecration, although Mastery gives multiple different defensive stats. It gives block chance and DR in consecration. Having good verse is just a nice bonus. And crit I have low. This will be changing in the future, but for the time being it is quite low, as I was valuing parry lower than versatility and mastery, but we'll come to that in the future. Talent wise, nothing really has changed. The only real flex point we have, as I've said before, is the spellboarding and inspiring Vanguard. There are definitely some cases that you would want to use spellboarding, but I would caution you against using it in a pug sense when you don't have communication with your healer. There are certain mechanics which will, how do I put this? You can wipe your group. If for example, on the second boss of Fall, as you're going to see here, you were to spell warding someone with a dispel on them, and the healer was to dispel the other person, both dispels would be instantly removed, and your group would wipe, basically. There needs to be a staggered gap between them, so just bear that in mind. Gear-wise, practically the same as last time. In terms of my trinkets, I'm running the Prophetic Stone Scales for the cheat death proc, and the Bolstering Crab for the approximately 30 to 40% mastery uptime proc, along with just main stat. It's quite a nice trinket to have if you don't have anything better. In terms of my damage, Avenger Shield is winning out. Consecration is lower in this key. This is because it's a bolstering week, we're pulling smaller. Very quick explanation of this is if you pull in very large pulls, your consecration damage will be higher because it is technically uncapped. It will deal damage to all targets at the same amount, no matter how many targets there are. 10 targets, 20 targets, 30 targets, it just scales linearly. Whereas with Avenger's Shield, the main cast of Avenger's Shield will do its 5 bounces, as always. Tears Enforcer will do more damage, because there's more enemies nearby to splash damage onto, but only effectively half of this spell will get its infinitely scaling bonus. But the one nice thing is this doesn't reduce with number of enemies nearby, so Tears Enforcer does still scale pretty well. My full set in this case is doing 8.5% my damage. It's usually between 8 and 10% for me. You can mix it and max it up to 12-13% I've seen, but that requires quite a lot of planning with your cooldowns, make sure they all line up. And then the last point I want to raise before I start is the head enchant. So if you haven't got the head enchant yet, it's now very easy to get. You go into the raid on any difficulty, you pick up the quest from the quest giver at the start. It's called the Power of Dreams. You have to collect 50 of an essence that drops when you kill a boss. You have to collect 4 items from 4 specific bosses. You hand it in, she gives you a thing, you consume that, you hand that in, and you get this item. This item is not consumed on use, so you just keep putting it on whatever new helmet you get. And regarding how long it takes to get, you can do it in 1 raid clear. If you fully kill all 9 bosses of the raid, you get everything you need to complete this in 1 run. So yeah, without any further ado, see you in the key. So to begin this run off, there's basically 2 different routes you can take, more or less. The first one is that you can pull all of this trash at the beginning and then skip at the end to make up, don't go over the count. And the alternative is you can skip trash at the beginning and go straight to the first boss. Basically that's a tyrannical fortified decision. So as this is fortified, we're going to pull this first big pack, bloodlust it, and work our way through it. So in here there's 2 things that the DPS has to be careful of, because we're quite a unlucky in that first bit there where he jumped on a melee person. The spinning guy is going to jump. If he gets bolstering stacks, he's going to basically one-shot. But it is random who he jumps on, so it can jump into melee, it can jump into ranged. Downside of jumping into melee is obviously then the tank has to move out of it, which moves the entire pack. As a paladin, that's a bit uncomfortable because of your consecration. But you can deal with it. As the bolstering stacks get really high here, this gets very scary. Lots of damage coming through onto me and to other people if they get jumped on. Like, whoever gets jumped on now is basically guaranteed to die. It will just be a one-shot on the first tick of the spin. He's about to jump, and... ooh, almost a one-shot.
3, 2, 1.
But yeah, for the most part that pool is quite clean. The entangling is kind of a non-affix as a paladin, so that's not too much to worry about.
We will keep the reinforcements at bay while you take care of their commander.
So sometimes here you'd be tempted to pull this into the boss. Because it's fortified bolstering and this dungeon is quite free on time, we decided not to do that. In this pack there is basically one thing you have to kick, is this chronomelt, and also there is a damage increasing debuff effectively that gets put on the tank, this one, Tempo Slice. You can stun that, incap that, whatever you want to do to stop him casting. The healer can also dispel it for you, so it's not the end of the world. Once again, unfortunately with this pack you've got two mobs which are most dangerous, and they're also much higher health, so they are going to get bolstered. There's not really any two ways around that. People just have to deal with it the best they can. Having both a mage and an augmentation evoker makes this a little bit easier. I guess the priest getting one shot there. Because of the Black Attunement Obsidian Scales for health bonus from the augment, and also the mass barrier from the mage. They can give a nice shield to a big burst of damage effectively. Alright, going into the boss fight here, so as it is a fortified week, bosses are relatively trivial. Just make sure the mechanics are done correctly. My experience with pugs in this boss is quite often they don't soak everything. So I was quite confident with this group and I wasn't too worried, but generally you, as a tank, if you want to try and carry the group as best you can, try and always do the soak. So after this big jump, there's these little orbs you have to avoid, and then there's this soak to do. So just make sure that you, as and when you can, do that soak, and that way it won't, the group won't wipe because it wasn't done. So yeah, the normal spell sequence here is he does one of these little thingies, then he does the jump, he does another little circle, and then he does this. So this has two, this knockback tank buster has two effects.
3, 2, 1.
It does a single hit of damage, which hurts a lot, and it applies an absorb heal and a debuff to you. So these all do different things. So the healing absorb is effectively a shield for the debuff. The healer cannot dispel the debuff until the healing absorb is cleared. So when it is cleared, the healer has to be very quick on that. But while you have the debuff, you actually take 300% increased damage. So it's kind of a moment you have to prepare for. I always make sure that I have a defensive running when I'm being hit by it. I make sure I'm obviously standing my consecration. And I try to make sure that I have Holy Power stacked up so that the moment it's over, I can just dump 1 or 2 Word of Glories into myself. So that one's an Eye of Tear there, and then I'm Holy Word of Glorying myself, and then the healer is instantly dispelling me, so it's relatively trivial. On a Tyrannical, that really hurts. If you do the pull where you pull the trash into the boss, my recommendation is be nice to your healer. On the first one of those tank busters, bubble. Because that way you'll still get the heal absorb on you, but you won't, and you'll get the debuff, but you won't actually take any damage from that 300% increased damage, so it gives the healer time to be able to deal with the mechanic. And I say the first one just because if you're pulling trash in, then that is a kind of sketchy moment. There's lots of other things to do, lots of other people to heal, everything else with all the other abilities that go off, and the healer needs to be ready for that. Try to be kind of sensible with your placement of these sand puddles. Work your way across the room like we did, because basically if you fill the room, although it will eventually clear, I think it's something like 3 minutes or something on them, but many of these boss fights, especially on the non-tyrannical key, will not last long enough for them to clear. And if you make a mess everywhere, you'll have nowhere to go.
The infinites have done well.
So this mob that I've currently got selected, this, what do you call it, Coalesce Time, is very scary. It's probably one of the, if not the scariest mobs in this dungeon, apart from the little dragons around third boss. So never... always be prepared for it, basically. In the Bolstering week, we decided to not pull it with anything else, we'll just deal with it on its own, I believe. But in the normal Fortified week, you can pull it with other things, but you have to be really careful. Basically what he does is he does a kick that you have to kick. It will pretty much wipe your team if you don't. That's pretty easy. And then he also does this Chrono Burst. This puts a dot on 2 people. They need to press a defensive for it, or it will pretty much one-shot them. So in both cases here, the DH was pressing some form of defensive, and the mage had my sacrifice and their own altar time, I believe, on them. So if you're quick in killing it, you'll get 2. If you get into 3, it gets quite uncomfortable. As you can see, the healer's kind of pumping the HPS right now. Almost got one shot by it there on the evoker. So the leeches do an, I think it's called Innovate. I'm not entirely sure how they word it exactly, but basically it's a cast. Yeah, Innovate there. So if you don't kick that, you see how the bar on my plater changes to grey? If you don't kick it in the cast, you can't kick the channel. The channel has to be stunned or incapacitated. So it's best if you can kick it. If you can't kick it, then obviously you've got Blinding Light to deal with it, you've got Hammer of Justice. There are ways of dealing with it. There are obviously a few of them here, but it's a general rule of thumb, you don't want to pull too many leeches into any one pull, because you can compare them a little bit like the Rune Weavers, I think they're called, in Waycrests that do the Etch cast. It is designed to kill a DPS. It will just target a person and do mega damage to that person. Unfortunately there the mage did die. It does happen. Realistically, when you get to high keys and when you're in Fortified Bolstering week, people are going to die. And it's really not the end of the world, because, especially in case of fall, the timer is very lenient. So just checking my route. Again, it's always really good practice, even if you've done this key 1,000 times before. Keep an eye on your route, make sure you're doing what you need to do, especially if there's several routes that you play from time to time. Make sure you've always got the idea that you're doing the correct one. You don't want to over-pull in a dungeon that's timed, and you also don't want to have under-pulled to the point where you have to run back at the end, because both of those are time losses. This guy is also pretty scary, this time stream anomaly. Basically he does 2 things. He does a frontal, which is going to hurt you a lot, and it will kill anyone you pointed at, so do not point it at anyone. And the second thing is he does this bloom cast, so it is guaranteed to go on the tank and one other random person. If the other DPS are immune at the time it goes out, it just never goes on them, and obviously they can immune it after the fact. But basically what the healer's going to always do is dispel the DPS because it hurts them more, and you as the tank are just going to have to live through it for 10 seconds. It's uncomfortable. So here we have another Coalesce Time, that initial scary mob that I mentioned at the start. You can't not pull him with stuff here. Ideally, you just really don't want to get him bolstered, so everyone here should be doing as much single target damage to him as is physically possible. So the little ads that you'll see spawn from time to time, basically when people get these circles on them, you'll see that they have to, not overlap with anyone, but then if they overlap with the sort of semi-transparent little time anomaly ads that walk around the room, you can kind of see them, but they're not targetable usually. They make them targetable by putting the circle on top of them. So they're not really that dangerous as long as the tank picks them up. If the cast that they do goes off, then they are lethal to anyone in the area. I've never actually stood in it as a tank, so I don't know if they're lethal to you or not, but they are definitely lethal to DPS. Basically, there shouldn't be a problem though. You can kick them if you really need to, but usually you just kill them. They die faster than they would get any casts off. Normally on Fortified you'd just pull this entire lot together here. I'm choosing not to just because of the bolstering and the fact we have plenty of time. I do not want to add 3 additional stacks of bolstering, or what is it, 60% more damage to the potentially lethal mobs in the next pull.
3, 2, 1.
Grapevine.
Freedom is your friend. Always remember that as well for entangling. If you have a particular party member in your group who needs it, you can always talent into the, I can't remember what it's called, Twin Freedoms or whatever, the ability to cast it on someone else and yourself, or you can just, you know, give it to someone else and you can walk out. But as a paladin, you want to stay in your consecration. Freedoming it so you can stay there and not have to walk out is the ideal scenario. They are never closer than, I think it's 35 or 40 seconds apart, the consecutive entanglings. So you will have freedom for every single one, providing you don't use it for any other mechanic. Alright, so trash is all cleared. Now we basically take a breather for a second. The healer can get some mana. And then we come to the boss. So this boss is honestly terrifying. It is probably one of the worst bosses, or the hardest bosses. I don't know if you want to say hard is bad or not. It's a pug killer, definitely. So there's a few different things to watch out for here. As a tank, when you run in, because it's a stationary boss, and it always pulls when you're technically out of melee, there's a really high chance you'll get a big hit. So I always run in with a defensive active. Just in case. It doesn't always happen, but when it does, your health drops to 20% or something from one melee. It's stupid. First mechanic that matters is these balls. It's not a case of, you know, oh, well, you know, I hit one. No, you just don't. You never stand in one. It does so much damage. Next, you've got these dispels. So basically, the dispels, you drop them intentionally in the light area, which means they go across the room very quickly. The idea being is that everyone takes 1 tick of damage when it passes through them. It also means that everyone ideally wants to be standing still, because if anyone is moving when it passes through you, you may be in it long enough to take 2 ticks of damage, which will insta-kill you. That includes the person who is being dispelled. It's actually even more important for the person who's being dispelled. If you can, when those dispels go off, if you're in the dark zone as someone who doesn't have a dispel, then you will take less damage, so that's always good. You'll see how kind of low people's health get here. Bearing in mind this is a fortified key. You can imagine how much worse this is on Tyrannical. As a paladin, you want to keep an eye on the healer's cooldowns and everyone's defensives. This is why I have, you see to the left of my party frames there, I can see a bunch of different cooldowns for people. That is Omni CD, an add-on which is tracking that. If I see that someone doesn't have a defensive, or like the evoker there, he drops very, very low, I can choose to dump my holy power to heal someone else. That is one of the strengths of the prop paladin. The only downside is it will rinse through your mana if you do it too much, and you do not want to fall over yourself because you spent time healing other people rather than you. Although it is is a balance to strike, but the ultimate kind of decision is, if I spend this 3 holy power now, will I live until the next 3? If you won't, because if there's just so much damage coming in, you just have to let the DPS and healer manage it, and if they die, they die. If the tank dies, the group dies. If one DPS dies, not entirely the end of the world. So as we move through it there, it was one sort of accidentally dropped in the dark zone. Not too bad, just pop a defensive as you walk through. Even as a tank, it really hurts.
With me, champions.
So for this next bit, many people skip this dragon, and I often like to skip the dragon, but in a bolstering week, you want to play the dragon. It is a mob which cannot be bolstered, because there's only one thing there, and it gives very high count. I think it's like 6 or 7, or possibly more percentage, just for one mob. Yes, it takes a little while, it's kind of a tanky mob, especially in Fortified, but it's, I would say, very worth it in a bolstering week.
With our infinite dawn.
Watch your step.
I'm very thankful that, not that they'll watch, but if they do watch, please don't take this as an indication of anything Blizzard. I'm very thankful that they didn't give this mob any like little guards or anything else with much less HP, because if this was, you know, had two little mini guys next to him and they died before he did, this would be probably just a key breaker on a Fortified Bolstering week. Like, if he gets Bolstering when he does that crazy Wind Fury thing, that would just be over.
Three, two, one.
Grapevine. Watch your step.
One thing to remember as well with entangling is not to panic. Once you get the entangling debuff on you, you're tethered to the area, you have a little bit of time to move out. It's not a case of, gotta run, quick, get out. Or, gotta send my freedom immediately. To have a relax, keep an eye on the debuff timer, and just kind of measure it out. You know, you can get a few globals in and do a couple of things before you need to move out, it's fine. If you do get stunned, which has happened to me before, I've been negligent and not paid attention. If you are playing a human, you can get yourself out of it with the racial, which is actually very useful in certain keys. If you are playing a paladin, which I'm assuming a lot of people watching this might be, then you can always bubble out of it. It's not really the best use of bubble. Sometimes you can just live through it, like, oh, I got stunned, oh well, I'll just stand here and take it for a second. So with this, these next two packs, so this being one pack here, but we split into two effectively, these big dragons are terrifying. Luckily, the little guys do not bolster them. If they did, this would be the most horrific thing in existence of WoW. Thankfully they do not, so we just murder down the little guys quickly, and then we just have to deal with this guy, just single target him down. The damage to the group from these mobs is insane. It requires a huge amount of healing, and so you really have to be careful how you want to do them. Usually, in most keys I've done, people will combine one pack, like for example this one, and then split the other one, or the other way around, just for the purpose of healer can send cooldowns, and then doesn't have them for the other pack. Now the optimum way of doing this is to combine the first two, so the ones we're doing right now, which means healer can send cooldowns, and then the following two, healers getting the cooldowns back individually, which means that they'll have the cooldowns available again for the boss. But in this case, we did it the other way around. I believe the healer didn't have their cooldowns at the beginning, or they just felt, for whatever reason, I'm not a Displeased expert, that just the cooldowns would line up the other way around. Prior to playing Prop Paladin, I haven't really spoken about this before, I played Holy Paladin, so I've played that since Season 4 of Shadowlands.
Watch your step.
I basically only came back to WoW in Shadowlands. I played a bit of Season 1, took a break again, came back in Season 4, and then I was pretty much playing Holy Paladin from Season 4 of Shadowlands through to Season 2 of Dragonflight. And when they made the rework to the Paladin, I'm actually not a big fan. I didn't enjoy it that much. I played it a bit, and I think I got up to, like, I don't know, 3.2k or something, just because it was broken as anything. It was stupid. But I just stopped enjoying it. It was my favourite spec, and then that was it. So here, on pull, because there's so many mobs all meleeing you, you're going to take a very big hit, so be careful of that.
Watch your step.
And the key here, really, because of the amount of damage that comes out, is once all the little guys are dead, one of these dragons wants to be killed as a priority, which lowers the healing requirement for the healer. Because even though, yes, it will bolster the other one, one dragon with bolstering, I propped my cheat death there for some reason, I'm not entirely sure how. One dragon with bolstering is doing less damage than two dragons. So it's always preferable to try and focus one down.
Watch your step.
One of the things I quite like about having the cheat death trinket, honestly, is sometimes in a key there are just moments when you take absurd amounts of damage, and it's not really expected. It's not really something that you can plan for or always know. It just randomly happens, like maybe you get crit by the enemy, or something happens, some overlap of several mechanics all at the same time. If I didn't have the cheat death trinket, that would have been a wipe, we would have reset, etc, etc. It's a really nice cushion to make sure those mistakes and things don't happen. So for this boss, again, it's obviously fortified, so still not too bad. The mechanics here, as far as the tank goes, is you want to try and move the blob not too much, because where he stands, you get this kind of, whatever you want to call it, greeny, purpley, nasty necro stuff that just kind of spreads all over the floor. People can't stand in that. You can see it building around him now. So once he's there, try and not move him too much, but obviously you have to avoid all these swirlies, so you have to move him as much as you have to move him. A random member of your party will get that thing on them, and then you basically want to be consumed by the boss in this frontal. The DH took it off me, that was a little bit awkward, but it's fine. And that will clear the debuff. There will no longer be a ball on top of anyone's head when you get consumed. If it times out, if you get to 0 seconds left on the debuff, then you basically get charmed and you wipe. But assuming that doesn't happen, then you're all good, basically. So for this mechanic here, I usually would ask the DPS, if I'm in voice with them, to hold on to the ball for a little while, because there isn't actually enough time for me to hold on to it from the beginning like that and not get charmed. But in this case, we just kind of juggled it between us, which is another way. A downside to doing this is that every time it transfers to a new person, the person receiving it takes a chunk of damage. So if you juggle it too much, you're kind of causing a lot of hardship for your healer. You really don't want to do that.
Target you.
So this is kind of my mistake on positioning here. It's not too bad because we have a split ranged and melee comp. So like the 2 melee people came over with me, the 2 ranged people stayed far away. But ideally it's best to not split your group like this, especially from the healer's perspective. So as soon as that mechanic is done, I'll just bring it back over here and then everyone's together again.
Watch your step.
I think the biggest thing from a Disc Priest is when they use their, I think it's Powered Radiance that spreads atonements, it's located around an area. It's a bit like putting down the consecration or whatever. It's not tied to that spot, but it'll only hit friendly players within the radius. So if everyone is spread everywhere, they can't spread atonements like that, and it can make certain moments much more scary. So one thing with this part of the boss, the dragon, which sort of stands still but jumps occasionally, will be baited to a random player. So depending where people hang around will dictate where the boss goes. It doesn't jump to the tank as far as I'm aware, or if it does, it's just, an equal chance for everyone else, which is less of you, so it happens less. If all the DPS and healer stack in a particular position like they have just now, they can force the boss to move to a better position. So it's always better to communicate with your team and try and make that happen if possible. What you don't want to do, which I've seen a few times, is when the boss spawns and you always run over to the left one, get aggro on it, then try and get aggro on the other one. If a DPS stacks up against the wall, then the dragon will just stay in the corner, because it'll jump from where it is to where it is. It's definitely an easier fight with ranged people, I'll just put it that way. It's a much easier fight with ranged people. Or at least if you don't have tons of melee in your group. So, as per the route, because we have done the first pack and all the required percentage up to now, we can now skip all the way to the end. I've been an idiot in this, and I used my pot as part of my macro. Usually, if you see on my toolbar, I have 2 instances of Sentinel. One of them is a macro and one of them is a base ability. So what I do is I'll just switch them around so I can keep using the same button, but not use the pots if I want to not. And I forgot to do this. So basically I will let them go. We'll kill the first pack just to make sure it's clean, because when you use an invis pot, it's very tight getting through. So if you create just a little bit more space by doing this, then you're guaranteed to get all the way through to the end and not accidentally pull something. So even though this is going over count, we have the time, it just makes it a bit safer. especially as I don't have Invis Pot. If I did have Invis Pot and we accidentally pulled something at the end, it wouldn't be too bad, because I'd be able to tank it, but I wouldn't be there. We need all of them to get there, and I'll run through and die, and then they'll mass res me. But also, Evoker doesn't have one either, so it's kind of just a fail on a couple of different people's points of view. So people moving forward, the DH has the ability to go, the Priest has the ability to go, that's the key one. As long as the Priest can, we're all good. And the Mage obviously can just use his own invis.
So, the Titan's puppets have come to face me.
He's siphoning Galikrond's essence into a vessel? It looks kind of like the Dragon Soul.
Crowd control.
A hunger lost.
Okay, so I'm dead, Evoker's dead, all this resets, we get mass resed. And then we have more or less enough time for the last boss. Like, it's a little tight, because this boss is a bit rough, but it's fine. We have 3 combat reses available, because we haven't need to use them, which is good. And we also have Bloodlust available. Just topping myself up. Need to reuse my Augment Rune, as the weak aura is telling me in the middle of the screen. Even though I forgot to do it at this time. See, you have these weak auras out, and you don't pay attention to them half the time. Considering it's right in the middle of my screen, you think it'd be obvious. Okay, so mechanics here. A DPS will have to go into that bubble with that, and then you have to stand in this circle in front. You will take a chunk of damage and you will be pushed back here, so you need to make sure that you're kind of always walking forwards to reset your position. If one of these goes through and a tank is not stood in that zone, it basically kills everyone inside the shield. You can help your healer here with healing Chromie if they need it, but you don't want to go or, ideally damage is better if the healer can handle it. Something like a Disc Priest, you don't need to help them, because basically what they'll do is they'll put like a Renew or something on Chromie which applies Atonement, and then they'll just DPS the boss. So it's passive healing. If, for example, however, you had, say, a Holy Paladin in your group, you'd probably want to help them out, because they just have to dump mana, basically, into Chromie to be able to heal her. Same, I believe, for Resto Shaman. Druids are not too bad, because they just put a couple of hots on and just kind of walk away and forget about it. And I haven't played with the Preservation Evoker yet this season, so I have no idea how easily or difficultly they manage that mechanic. So at this point now, you'll see I've got a debuff that's ticking up there. Basically, every time this boss melees you, you get a stacking debuff which increases damage taken from physical attacks. So the further you get through this phase while he's free to melee you, the rougher it gets and the more damage you take. You'll see my health start to spike a bit when he melees me. As a tank, this is actually the most dangerous part of the key, realistically, or of the key of the boss fight. But while he's casting and doing all the other things, obviously this isn't a mechanic. The mage invis there, so they never got the cast on them. So yeah, we do this. Freeing myself so I don't have to move out. You do not want to get stunned in that position. And carrying on quite nicely. I'm still impressed that I didn't notice the Augment Rune warning in the middle of my screen. It's kind of giant. Basically with this, what do we call it, sort of fan mechanic, you just move into the brown ground a tiny bit before it comes through. That way you don't get hit by things. You don't want to hang out in there because it does do damage, but you can move into it for a few seconds to avoid the upcoming thing. As a ranged player, you don't have to ever step in the brown ground, because there is a kind of gap when it gets far enough away from the boss, but as a tank you never want to be that far away, or I'm not sure you can be on this boss because he moves. Although you can actually melee him from very far away. There's a very large hitbox. The sort of pug normal with this mechanic is you always go left of the frontal, and that way everyone just knows what they're doing and what to expect. To be sure, to be confident, just call it. When it's about to happen, just say left or something. People will get what you're talking about. Communication is key with your group, always. The more communication you can do, the less misunderstandings you'll have, the more cooperation you'll have, and the more successfully you will complete your keys.
3, 2, 1.
There is a belief by some people that the tank is kind of the leader of the party, and I would say that while yes, this is true because you dictate the route, and to an extent you can become as much of a leader as you want to because you can, try and guide people through and sort of hold people's hands, you need to always defer to other people as well. So, if there's a particular mechanic which is a healing check with your healer. Don't expect them to be able to do something. Don't assume they're the same as all other healers. Make sure they're okay with it. And then this phase is purely just keep people alive and smash damage. I don't need to heal people once the healer's ramping, it's just at the very beginning when it looks a bit scary. But as soon as the priest gets going, you're absolutely fine. And that is the whole key. Successfully killed a Galikrond, and we have, a couple of minutes left? It's not too bad. That was actually quite a clean key with not too many deaths. I've done much less clean ones on a non-bolstering. It's actually something I like about bolstering. It encourages you to play better because it's so much more punishing when you fail. But when you get the really big pulls and you can sort of go, 10 people died, 15 people died, who cares, what matter? But yeah, so thank you for watching, and I will see you all again soon, and have a good Christmas.